So yes, it's also my pleasure to welcome you to this InfoX Insights event from my part. And I'm really glad that we're having now finally the chance to present all the amazing work we have done in the past 3 years. As Christian said, of course, it's a bit sad that we are not yet able to welcome you at DGAP, but hopefully in the future this will be possible. And so, as I said, we have already heard a bit about the idea behind InfoX. We have already heard a bit about the trends from Peter. So now my job is to go a step back and do 3 things in my presentation today, because I think it's important to explain again where we come from and where we get the trends that I will present today. So first, I want to explain the idea behind InfoX. Once again, Axel Kreinbrink has also mentioned some important aspects, but I think it's worth to still go a bit deeper. Then I will give also some insights for the first time into the project's outputs and outcomes. And finally, then the longest part will be on the international trends in tertiary prevention of Islamist extremism as identified in this project. So, as you probably know, or hopefully know, Germany is a federal state, and the prevention of extremism relies within the responsibility of the Bundesländer of the German states. So this means, and I think this is important to understand, that in the last decades, each state in Germany has developed a bit of their own approach. So in some states, the prevention lies mostly in the hands of civil society actors, counseling centers, while in others, it's more a task of governmental actors. And here you see the actors that are part of the counseling network of the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, the BAMF. And with other governmental actors, they form this kind of network working on tertiary prevention. There are many more people and actors working on this topic. So this already shows the diversity of the actors, which is really good because they can focus more on local situations. However, prevention is already very complicated. And this system of having so many diverse actors makes the exchange between even more important. So this is why in summer 2018, the DGAP, a think tank for foreign and security policy, in cooperation with the BAMF, decided to establish InfoX. So having a forum for this network of civil society and governmental partners that are working in tertiary prevention. And we did so, as mentioned before, funded by the BMI, the Federal Ministry of the Interior. And when Melina Uhlmann, who's also on the call today, then with the BAMF and now with the BMI, and me started the project, we quickly decided that we need to have a catchy title that still included all the important aspects of the project. So in the end, I'm really happy that we invested quite some time, because InfoX is the handy title that we were looking for. And it basically says what we are doing. It's an international forum for expert exchange on countering Islamist extremism. And I think at this point, it's also to have a quick look at what we actually mean when we talk about tertiary prevention, at least in the context of this project. So with tertiary prevention of violent or non-violent Islamist extremism, we mean all measures designed to support violent or non-violent extremists in prison and society settings in their efforts to leave their milieux, to disengage, to de-radicalize, decriminalize, and reintegrate into society. But InfoX is also part of a larger program. And this also, Axel Kreinbrink has already mentioned, the actors circled in blue are those practitioner organizations who have embedded researchers of the FOPRATEX network who want to improve this knowledge exchange between practice and research. And for example, I'm also a research fellow, but embedded within the DGAP, so a bit of a different research fellow. And to maximize these outcomes of exchange and so on, we also need international knowledge exchange. And this is where DGAP, as a focus on foreign and security policy, comes into place. So let's have a look quickly at what we define as objectives and what we have basically been doing over the past years. We always, together with this network of civil society and governmental actors from the network, identified topics that were relevant to them, that they wanted to discuss. Then we try to identify who are international experts, mostly from Europe, but also from other countries, who can provide really good insights from a practical experience, from research experience on the topics that we have selected. Then we organized workshops, both on offline, but now in the past years also digital, to discuss the challenges, but also the good practices with this forum of international national experts. And then finally, we put all these findings together and communicated the findings that we have found in issue papers in English and in German, and you can find them all on our website. But we do plenty of other things too. Yes, we have several workshops, we have several publications, but we also decided to go public. And this is something that Peter has mentioned, to communicate what tertiary prevention is about, to showcase the expertise that we have in the network. This is why we did several public events. We recorded them. They're available on YouTube as well. But we also compiled research findings from international research journals, translated them in German, and provide the summary to our network. We also compiled a selective expert pool so that we can recommend speakers for your next event on tertiary prevention. And finally, the publications and the invitations to our events and so on are sent out to now 300 people that are on our mailing list. At the same time, our objective from the start on actually has to be not to focus too much on quantity, but on quality. So we want to reach the right people, and we want to help these people make their work more effective. And this is the reason why during all the events that we have done, we're always including an evaluation at the end. And we have also spent the past years interviewing a carefully selected number of different network members to hear about their impression of the project and how this project has maybe helped their work, make their work better. And we have had several criteria, and I will just very quickly go what we have found about the different criteria of the self-evaluation that we did. So what was very good to hear is that the workshop formats that we chose, the topics that we chose, having this closed circle of participants and so on, was very relevant, and it was also very helpful for newcomers coming new to the sector. And also for the issue papers, they were considered very readable and providing a great summary, especially for those who have not been able to attend the workshop. Then we have effectiveness and efficiency. So we always try to be organizing in a professional manner, and for example, not focus on longer lectures, but really short inputs of like 10 minutes, and then rather providing space for discussion and working groups to have this kind of exchange among the 30 participants. Also a good thing to not overload the workshops that we have doing. And we also tried always to communicate the topics and dates at the beginning of the year so that everybody knows what to expect this year. This was also mentioned as good for the organization. At some point, we also started to use interpretation between German and English, which also made it easier for people who are not that comfortable speaking in English to actually participate and exchange with international speakers. And when we transitioned in 2020 at the start of the pandemic into digital events, this was actually, yes, more difficult to build trust among participants, but also it was easing the communication between people. And of course, also our digital events were able to reach more people who would otherwise have to be coming to Berlin to attend the event. And then finally, also impact. There was, for example, the realization by certain governmental actors what aspect they might be explaining too little to civil society, so that some procedures it might be, and this again, Peter has said, is really worth to communicate more the own work that we're doing, so that the actors that we cooperate with have a better understanding. And also sustainability is something that we looked at. As I said, the issue papers is something that is here to stay. We also printed them. They include some recommended reading. We have the recordings of our events. And also something interesting I found is that interviewers mentioned that the media interviews and articles in the press that I did was also contributing to a more nuanced discourse on tertiary prevention, something that they would not maybe be able to say publicly, but it was something that I could communicate from the exchange and the workshops. I really like this process of evaluation because we were able to exchange with the participants, and while they were very positive and were very grateful for the work that we're doing with InfoX, they were also very eager to put in their own ideas and had some very constructive criticism, I would like to call it. And so today I would just like to share 3 recommendations that came out of this evaluation that I found particularly interesting. So first, yes, there was more networking, there was knowledge exchange in the workshops and so on. But what I found interesting is that effective networks are actually built when people work together in a team on a common tasks. So this could be something for the future that could be strengthened to build even stronger networks. The second aspect that we also found out when working on this project is that it's good to speak about good practices and challenge and so on. It's good to look at other countries, how they are doing their work in tertiary prevention work, but how do we actually transfer what we have learned to other contexts, to the German context, but also, for example, between right-wing extremism and Islamist extremism. And I think this is, as Peter said again, I think this is something that we should keep in mind on in the future. And very similarly, there were also people saying, well, this is great, but we're only focusing on Islamist extremism. So what about other types of extremism? And for example, say we should really establish something like that for right-wing extremism, for practitioners and researchers working in the prevention of right-wing extremism. So now that you know a bit more about the idea of InfoX, what we have done over the past years, now it's time for the third part of the presentation to really speak about the trends. So when I was preparing for today and I was trying to stuff in all the things that we have discussed, that we found out, I realized that I really also had to accept the same challenges that we pose to our workshop speakers to present a very complex topic in less than 10 minutes, because it's always something they said, it's too short, how am I going to do it? But I think it's worth to really reflect what is the things that I want to say. So I decided to go for 3 columns to maybe oversimplify, but still, if there are like 3 things that you go out of this presentation today, it's these 3 things. And interestingly, some of them, and this is a good thing, were already mentioned by Peter, which only supports what we have found, I believe. So I opted for diversity, cooperation, and sustainability, or effectiveness, depending on how you want to see it. So first, the target group of prevention work is getting increasingly diverse. Again, Peter has had the same observation, and I'm happy to say that, yes, this is also something that we found out. And the first trend is increased number of female clients. So over the several thousand people who had left Western Europe to join jihadist organizations, such as the so-called Islamic State, around 20% were women. And many of those who have returned or will return in the near future are also probably women. So yes, we know and we care a lot more about the role of women and the role of gender in extremism and in political violence and so on. This trend is still going to pose new challenges to exit work. For example, gaining access to female clients is much more challenging because they are less likely to be convicted and to receive a prison sentence. They sometimes adopt a victim's perspective, and they're reportedly less experienced working with female inmates in prison. Also, former female extremists face greater stigma when they're wanting to, which makes their integration into society even harder. And now, in the gallery walk, Dr. Gina Vale will speak about the role of gender in tertiary prevention. And in another working group, it's going to be Claudia Danschke, who will share her practical experience when working with returned women. The second trend is that many of the returned women travel with children who have been brought along by the parents when abroad. In many cases, the husband and the father has reportedly died, been detained, or vanished. And while there is already experience in tertiary prevention with minors growing, for example, growing up in Salafist families, there's still new challenges with returning minors. So, for example, being separated from their parents upon return can really exacerbate existing instability. There's also still a lack of mother-child facilities in prison. And trauma might arise once returning children are older. We're very happy to have in the gallery walk Andre Taubert provide insights into his long experience working with children and youth, also returned minors. Finally, in this column of diversity, prevention is not a national issue only. So the former or probably IS affiliates and German nationals are currently detained in camps and prisons abroad. There are all by few cases of asylum seekers and refugees that have radicalized, and there are increasingly young girls radicalizing online. These are just 3 examples, but the internal and external security, the offline and online spaces are not something that we can just separate, but they make radicalization and de-radicalization much more diverse, and this trend is also likely to continue. Again, something that Peter has mentioned already. Then there's also increased cooperation with tertiary prevention, and this is the second big column that I want to speak about. Within cooperation, the fourth trend is multi-agency cooperation. Because beyond supporting individuals to leave extremist groups behind or detect and protect against possible security risks, we know that a person's successful reintegration into society also depends on much more practical elements like finding a place to stay, finding a job, or treat health issues. And so the increased cooperation between civil society and governmental actors, with institutions that provide these kind of services, is indeed a growing trend and important but challenging. For example, case discussions of returned children often include youth welfare offices, child protection services, different ministries, school, kindergarten, psychotherapists, not to speak of, for example, actors from prison and probation. But these actors often have little experience with this type of clients. The objectives and responsibilities of a new kind of cooperation need to be discussed, and data protection guidelines, while very important, can make information sharing often very difficult. In the gallery walk, Luisa Römer will share her experience as returnee coordinator in Hesse. And originally, we had also Sophie Schäuble providing insights into multi-agency cooperation today, but unfortunately, she is sick. But no worries, we have enough groups that will also touch upon multi-agency cooperation. So you can also discuss this kind of cooperation in other working groups. The fifth trend is mental health, again, something that Peter has mentioned. And I just want to mention that there were several attacks in Europe where mental health issues seem to play a role. For example, the perpetrator of the attack in Würzburg in June 2021 was reportedly suffering from mental health issues. And there are increasing attacks where there's a lot of speculation what role mental health played, how much it was actually radicalization or not. And this is a touchy issue. So there is already in broader society more attention for mental health issues. And also research practice and policy in tertiary prevention is recognizing more and more the diversity of mental health issues, which can range from depressive symptoms to severe pathologies. And we also know that sometimes they can play an important role in radicalization processes. However, exit workers are not always able to detect mental health issues unless are trained to address them. And even if they're detected, it's not very easy to provide quick access to mental health expertise. And also, some mental health experts have also reservation to work with this kind of target group. In the gallery walk, Dr. Kisian and Dr. Bialov are both psychological psychotherapists, and they can provide insight into this kind of nexus between mental health and prevention work. And finally, as part of the trend towards more cooperation with more actors from different professions, there's also an increased interest in working with the local communities, for example, Muslim stakeholders, and also migrant communities. And we know that this engagement and reintegration in society is clearly a team effort, but how we cooperate with whom and when is really a controversial topic. For example, how can exit work avoid stigmatization when we're working together with a mosque on violent extremism? And how do we deal with actors that are between nonviolent and violent extremism on a policy, but also very practical level? In the gallery walk, Dr. Samit Er will be sharing research and practical experience with Muslim religious care in the penitentiary institutions. And then the last column is about sustainability. So to achieve sustainability of prevention work, we need to find out what's most effective and fund it. So as Peter also mentioned, there's a more focus of many countries, also in Europe, for example, who are focusing on prevention rather than only repressive counterterrorism measures. And there's also considerable more money spent on tertiary prevention. So there's also growing understanding that actors need to be able to understand and demonstrate which measures work, how, and why. So that's great, but there are a range of ethical and practical questions that pose a serious challenge to actually say what works and how and why. For example, disengagement processes, and that this is something that we also know now, can take a long time, months, but also years. And these are often longer than the funding cycles of projects and programs, which makes it really difficult to observe change over time. And how do we determine if it was really the exit program who made a client leave his extremist group if there's no possibility to use control groups? So still, the trend clearly goes towards including both monitoring and evaluation in program and project designs and implementation, but we're still at the beginning of this journey. In the gallery walk, Dr. Kurt Möller from the University of Applied Science Esslingen and Lisbeth van der Heide from the municipality of Den Haag have both experienced evaluating tertiary prevention measures and will share their insights. And then preventing recidivism also contributes to sustainability. So something that Peter also mentioned is that there's a significant number of inmates that are convicted for terrorism-related offenses or considered radicalized who are being released or will be released in the coming years. So while we know that recidivism rates are relatively low compared to average offenders, around 5%, depending how you measure it, the time just after a prisoner's release was considered by researchers and practitioners as the most delicate phase and the critical moment for preventing recidivism. And to assess the risk of both former offenders, but also potential extremists, there's also a growing number of risk assessment tools. So internationally, most known are probably VERA2R, ERD22, or TREB18. And they all have been developed in the past decade. And still, important challenges remain in this area. For example, the evidence base remains very weak. The tools have normally less significance when assessing women. And very important, critics have also stressed that there's still not enough focus on protective factors and not only on risk factors. In the gallery walk, Dr. Thomas Renard will speak about his research on recidivism rates among terrorist convicts. And Christopher Dean is a forensic psychologist who was involved in the design of ER22, will be speaking about risk assessment. And finally, final trends in the sustainability column is that sustainability and effectiveness also depends on the exchange between research and practice. And the past years working on this project have really confirmed this. There's more and more scholarly research who's looking into de-radicalization and disengagement processes. But when we are trying to select articles for our newsletters, we had a list of criteria, what is considered good science. And very few works of work really ticking all the boxes. There are, for example, few that are based on primary sources. There are few who are really working multidisciplinary, and very few are using a hypothesis. At the same time, it also became apparent that practitioners are indeed interested in latest research findings, but they find, often they don't simply find the time to read them, and it's really hard to integrate the results into their daily work. In the gallery walk, Hannah Baron and Annika von Berg are both part of the ForProtect network that we mentioned before, and they will share their experiences as embedded researchers within practitioners' organizations. So now we have, I think, a good basis, both where we have these trends from, what in our opinion are the most important trends in terror prevention of Islamist extremism, both in Germany, but also abroad.